came in the person of Master Akbar Muhammad, and in the name of his last, most surely his greatest messenger, the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, thank you very much for being with us this evening, and I hope and pray to Allah that He will bless me to say a few words that will give you a greater understanding of the honorable Elijah Muhammad, the work that Brother Farrakhan is doing to rebuild the nation, and that will inspire you to come and help us in this great effort. I would like to start quickly and go right into the subject. I want to do part 3 on the history of the Nation of Islam. And I know that there may be brothers and sisters who were not here for the first 2 parts. And I really won't have time to do a good review of where we started, but I'd like to continue. How many were not here to hear the first 2 parts of the history of the nation? That's all of our guests about. Briefly, for the benefit of our brothers and sisters who are visiting us, I would just want to take about 10 minutes, and I'll go through this as quickly as possible. The reason for the subject on the history of the nation that I felt personally, and as I talked to Brother Farrakhan about it, is to give those brothers and sisters who are just coming to serve the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and help Brother Farrakhan an overview of what the nation has been through for the last 51 years. And the Nation of Islam may be new to many of us, but the Nation of Islam is not new on the American scene. Within the framework of the Nation of Islam, there are many brothers who emerged out of the nation that you have heard their names. Rap Brown, though he was not an active member, but he came and sat in a temple and heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he was inspired to go out and try to do something to heighten the consciousness of black people. Kwame Torrell, Stokely Carmichael, Huey Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, and one that is known more so than anyone is Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. Those 2 individuals came out of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So when the messenger's teaching produces men that cause you to focus on the men, but because of notoriety, publicity, press coverage, you don't see the root that produced the men, and you love them in their brilliance and their greatness, then it's only proper for those of us who are privy to the knowledge of how these men climbed to that status, that you recognize them in their greatness, then it becomes a responsibility of those of us who know how it all began to share with others. And believe me, I know that history is not the most attractive subject to some people, because there's a dislike of history based on the fact of how white folks presented history to us. So you would hear that I just don't like history. I don't see how it's relevant, because you never saw yourself in history. And so therefore, when the white man continues to pour into us European history and American history, and to cram our brains with dates and facts and individuals that we couldn't relate to, and in no shape or form could we see the benefit of learning things about these individuals, then the subject of history became very unattractive. And when black people begin to learn about themselves, a young brother who first hears the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the first thing he wants to do is to get some knowledge about black people that he did not learn in the schools of white folks. He wants to learn about the black man and what great feats has he accomplished. We know enough negative things about black folks, but we need to know some positive things. So in light of that, we have been working on the history of the Nation of Islam to give you the origin of the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, how he was missioned, who missioned him, how long ago it was, how he first began to work, what took place with the early followers, why was he incarcerated, why did the white man send him to jail, and then as the messenger began to emerge on the scene in America, why did they describe him as a hate teacher? You know, they never said that Elijah Muhammad is a truth teacher, and that he's teaching the truth about the suffering of black people and the origin of the white man on the planet, and why everybody under the rule of white folks that are other than white suffer under their rule. See, he was teaching the roots of that. Why is it that all dark people on the planet who are ruled over by white folks suffer under the rule of white folks? Then he showed how the condition that we're in is a direct response or a direct result of how we were taught and trained by white folks. If you drive down Monroe or drive through the west side and you see that our people are in bad shape, and you see them suffering, fighting, killing, stabbing one another, then there's a reason for that. And if you understood history, you would understand the reason. But when you look at it on the surface and don't know the background of it, then you just see them as niggers in bad shape. That's all you can say. But when you understand the history of how the nigger got in bad shape, then you can say, well, it's really not his fault. And at the root of that is what white folks have put on us since we've been in America. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a man who came to quicken our consciousness to this fact. And then after he made you realize the fact, then he unfolded to us the plan of God in the whole scheme. And what God intended for us to have, and what God called for us to do, how you must qualify to enjoy the blessings of God once you become knowledgeable to how you got into the condition. He opened your eyes to make you see the white man as he really is. So in that history, we started in 1930, actually, when Master Akbar Muhammad, the Savior, first began to teach in America. We went to 1931 when the messenger, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, came to a meeting. He was not a Muslim. He was a general Negro. He came to the meeting. His brother invited him. He heard the teaching, and he accepted it. And he had not been through the educational system of the Western world. And he didn't have that in him. He knew nothing. Actually, as he said, I knew nothing. He called himself a filthy worm, and we used to hate to hear him say that. But he said, I knew nothing. And everything that he learned was taught to him by the Savior, and he built the nation of Islam. He went through a 7-year period of being away from his family and on the move, on the run, trying to escape those who wanted to take his life for what he was teaching. He went to jail during World War II because the white man did not want him teaching that white folks were devils and that Negroes were fools to believe that there was a devil down in the ground. So they didn't want him teaching that because that would stop the Negroes from fighting for the white man against his enemy. So they put him in jail from 1942 until the latter part of 1946. He came out of jail and he began to build a nation of Islam. In 1952, Malcolm, who was in prison, he was a thug and a criminal. He got caught up in vice and went to jail, and he heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he came out of jail to become a follower and a disciple of the messenger. The messenger taught Malcolm and his son Wallace personally, gave them special lessons, so to speak, and taught them the wisdom that God had given him. He made both of them very brilliant and men who could go out and articulate the teachings and make converts. Malcolm worked in New York, and as Wallace got older, he worked in Philadelphia for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm became known through his work with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and when the white folks saw that the Nation of Islam had the actual power to pull black brothers and sisters, young people, out of the lifestyle that white folks had prescribed for us, then the Nation of Islam became a threat to white America, and they had to turn the black public off as far as listening to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So what white folks were able to do was to describe us as a hate group. And there's something in the word hate, especially the victims of some vicious hatred coming from white folks, that we didn't want to associate with the word hate. So we were people who believed in Jesus and God is love. And so when they heard that the Muslims taught hate, they said that couldn't be of God because God teaches to love everybody. But only a fool loves everybody. The first person you got to love is yourself. And so we hated ourselves but loved white folk. And that was the way that we were programmed. So when they heard the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that made the black man first love his own kind and look at the vicious enemy who had destroyed him, they described it as hate teaching. We never said that, but when white folks heard that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was teaching that the white man was the devil, then the white man said that anybody with any sense wouldn't love the devil, they would hate the devil, so they say Elijah Muhammad is a hate teacher. Knowing that from black folks, they would get the response, I don't want any association with that group. Scared, handkerchief-head Negroes who love white folks and love to be bootlickers to white folks did not want to associate with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So they described the Nation of Islam in the early 60s, number one, as the black Muslims who taught hate. And this was designed to stop all Negroes who were trained by the white man, who had the knowledge of how to make things work, from come into the service of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. They used the fact that his chief lieutenants or his chief officers were ex-convicts, that in the ranks he had converted prostitutes and the dregs of society, and that they were all ex-thugs and pimps and criminals. So anyone who was brought up as a mama's boy certainly didn't want to associate with those bad guys who were described as black Muslims. So in the early 60s, the white man put this out all over the country, and then he got Negro leaders. Many of you are too young to remember some of them, but Ralph Bunch, okay? They got A. Philip Randolph, Roy Wilkins, and all of these Negro leaders, Whitney Young, they got them to make public statements condemning the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, saying that he was teaching segregation. And most Negroes from the South, they were already segregated by the white man. And they said, now why would another black man teach segregation? So they described us as the Klan in reverse. And so every black person that read a little and heard about Muslims thought that we were some way out people who didn't believe in God and Jesus and was teaching hate against white folks, and had a group of brothers who were all thugs. And we had a self-made prophet, Elijah Muhammad, who was proclaiming that the white man was the devil and that God was going to destroy America. But all of that was gained in order to attract the people to him as followers. Check it out now. The same vicious white man that allowed this lie to go out unchecked, and he pushed it out, let such leaders as Daddy Grace, Father Divine, Prophet Jones, and today a Reverend Ike, he lets them go unchecked. And as long as they can preach and teach to black folks and keep them in the religion of Christianity and make them passive good slaves in America, those kind of self-made leaders are all right. But when it comes to a man like Elijah Muhammad, who cleans up the black man from the filth of the white man's world, then he becomes a problem. So we brought this point in our teaching the history of the nation. The messenger began to work in the 50s, and he worked hard. He moved around the country, going to different cities, teaching black people, and by 1959 and 1960, the whole country that were readers were aware of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So the white man felt that he could put him in the press, give him adverse publicity, and it would keep black people away from him. But it worked just the reverse, because in the early 60s there was a tremendous amount of unemployment. There was a tremendous amount of criminal activity in the black community. There was a tremendous amount of drugs in the black community. So when they began to talk about the Muslims, and they talked about this group, what had happened is most people got curious, and they started going to check them out. And when they went to the meetings to check us out, they said, wow, this is all right, and they began to join. So then the government of the United States said that we must stop the movement. So whenever the government wants to stop a movement, he does just as he has done in the Arab world today. He divides the people up, you understand? And he sides with some, aids others, makes others fight each other, and then he moves on whoever he wants to crush and destroy, as you see happening with the PLO in Lebanon right now. After the Jews in cahoots with America and England divided the Arabs up, made them all fight and kill one another and arguing over philosophy and government with one another, then the Jews strike out, and they're whipping the Arab in Lebanon, and his brother is standing back saying you're wrong, but don't have the power to lift his hand to come and help defend his brother who is being killed. Well, that same old game that the white man used, divide and conquer, it has never changed. He uses it, and he continues to use it, but he becomes more sophisticated. He doesn't come in and divide you himself. He sends in the imps and the agents and the people who have egos and vain desire and have desire of gain, and they use those on the inside. Egypt, which was the strongest force in the Middle East and still is, they had a personal desire to solve their own economic problems. And because they put their own desire to solve their own economic problems ahead of the brotherhood of the entire Arab world, and they being the strongest, they become handcuffed by America and Israel, and they can't come to the aid of their brother. So this same vicious devil saw that he had to perform this type of situation with the Nation of Islam because our growing popularity among the youth, which was his greatest threat. He knew that if the idea of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad could be buried in the mind of a black young man, And he knew that the idea of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was like a seed, and the mind of the youth in black America was like fertile soil. And if they heard that teaching, it was like planting that seed in fertile soil, and they may not see it today, but they knew that in 5 and 10 years that that seed would take root, and what Elijah Muhammad taught would begin to show itself among the black youth of America. He feared that more so than anything, so his desire was to split up the nation. So in order to do that, he took the chief lieutenant, spokesman of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who was Brother Malcolm. And Malcolm, being the forceful speaker of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he began to work on splitting Malcolm from the Nation of Islam. This, as I taught last few weeks ago, this he perfected in 1964. He had the schism going. He used his newspaper. He would say there's a power struggle in the Nation of Islam, that Elijah Muhammad is an old man that's about to die, and there's people contending for the leadership. Raymond Sharif, Malcolm X, Herbert Muhammad, or Nathaniel Muhammad. And he made out there was a power struggle going on, and the propaganda was not only for the outside world, but the propaganda affected the inside of the temple itself. I, a young Muslim reading the paper, ain't no power struggle here. The messenger is the leader. So every time Malcolm came up to speak, he became suspect by the Muslims who were affected by what white folks put in their paper. They say, yeah, I didn't hear him say the messenger 5 times tonight. He only said it 10 or 4 times. He should have said it 5. Okay? So the Muslims became affected because we had what we call positive jealousy. Anybody to block out the light of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was an enemy to the cause of Islam. The devil worked that show. And by 1964, he perfected it because of Malcolm, as I taught in my subject the last time on the history of the nation, part 2, that Malcolm disobeyed the messenger on 3 occasions. And you know the old saying, 3 strikes you're out? And after he disobeyed the messenger 3 times, he fell out of grace. And when he fell out of grace, he decided that he would resign from the Nation of Islam. And on March the 8th, 1964, Malcolm X resigned from the Nation of Islam to form his own group. And white folks in the FBI office cheered because they had effected what they wanted, a split in the ranks of the Nation of Islam. The youth in the nation, they felt, would champion the cause of Malcolm, and the older, more settled Muslims would stay with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, but it would be a split right in the ranks of Islam. But what he did not calculate, as the Holy Quran says that they plan a plan and Allah plans a plan, and Allah is the best of planners. So they planned, but they didn't know the power of the plan of God. So when they expected wholesale defection from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, only a few left the messenger because the messenger's teaching was buried in us that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the messenger of God and nobody else can stand in that position. They also thought that the messenger would die in 1962 because he was sick and ailing, and we had to move him to Phoenix where he could get air. He had bronchial asthma, and he was suffering from it real bad, had lost weight, and they thought he was going to die, but he rallied from his sick bed and came back healthy and strong and rallied the nation. So look, and I'm going to go through this. I'm trying to give you that background because I know how it is if I just start at a point and you weren't here for the last 2 subjects. So I ran through that quickly. I stopped at my last lecture on Malcolm's separation from the nation, and we call it a defection from the nation. He left the nation. And I left you on the note that the reason that the name of Malcolm, you have a college here in Chicago named Malcolm X College. You have schools all over the country named after Malcolm. Some cities, they have streets named after Malcolm. They have children's books on the life of Malcolm. They have his autobiography, Malcolm X Speaks. There's films all in the library on Malcolm. And so the name of Malcolm is promoted heavily. And when you read under Malcolm, you never see the fact that Malcolm was a Muslim for 12 years following the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And when he left the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm was not on his own for 1 solid year. So if there's a greatness to Malcolm, if Malcolm is a great man, then his greatness has to be summed up in something. Martin Luther King, you called him great because Martin Luther King started in Birmingham in 54, I believe it was, and Martin Luther King worked until 1968 when he was killed. So Martin Luther King had there 14 years of service that he worked in behalf of the civil rights movement. If Roy Wilkins was involved in the movement for 25 years, he made his record by the 25 years that he worked. See, that's why if a man says, I'm 20 years old and I'm going to write my autobiography, what could you write? You just got under the care of your mother 4 years ago. You haven't even lived yet. You understand? So what are you going to write about at 20 years old? So you have to get out in the world and do things. And I want you to remember this, and I want to say to my brothers and sisters who know Malcolm and love Malcolm, I don't want you to take this history of the nation as a thing where those Muslims are just down in Malcolm. No, I'm presenting you with the facts. And the reason that I have to present you with the facts, because the devil, there's a battle going on. The battle that's being waged, the devil is fighting to keep your mind locked up in his world. We're trying to unlock your mind from his world. And we don't have access to your mind like the devil does. The devil got you in the morning with his newspaper. He got you on this station in the morning that you keep jammed all the time. You understand? He got you at the television in the evening, so he's got open access to your mind. And believe me, he plays the games of mind manipulation. You understand? I mean, the evidence of the fact is that most of the brothers who are above 24 years old have read Malcolm's autobiography. They identify with Malcolm. They like Malcolm. They draw strength from him. But they turned right around, and Malcolm in the book talked about a Negro with a processed head. And he said how he first conked his head, and how he put the conch in, and how it was burning his head. You understand how he stuck it in a toilet stool to cool it off in order to get his hair straight. And he said, I was getting my hair straight like the white man. Now, most brothers read that. But to show you how the devil wins the battle, you read that and you understood it, that a processed head represents a processed mind. You understand? Meaning that you black, but you're trying to really be the white man, because he sets up the symbols and the standards of beauty. So you feel that straight hair represents beauty because the white man made it that way. And here we are in 1982 doing what Malcolm did in 1947. You understand? The same thing. But it shows you that what's wrong? Didn't the man wake up to know that this is the way that God gave us our hair? And why should I try to straighten my hair to make it curly or straight like the white man? And he promotes the idea of frying your head. Don't you know what it does to your scalp and your hair? And this is why brothers who lived through that period, all of them got toupees today. Those that process their hair, you should be able to talk. If, what's his name, Duke Ellington was still on the scene today, he said, I would have never did it. Because he kept a processed head from the 20s right until the time he died in the 70s. So therefore, what I'm saying, that it ruins the head. It tells you that I'm trying to identify with what the white man has established as the guidelines of beauty. And I'm doing the same thing in 1982. And though I read about it, but yet and still I'm blind. So showing you that there's a battle going on, but the white man is winning the war, okay? So now we have to call God in on the scene. He's the only one that can deal with it. Look, we were saying the last time I spoke that March 8, 1964, and you can read this in the New York Times, Malcolm left the Nation of Islam with a press conference in New York, okay? Now we're talking about the history of Malcolm, the greatness of Malcolm, and what was going on at this time. The FBI that was following him, that was monitoring his speeches, and that was looking carefully into the work of the messenger. Malcolm left the nation that day, and those who read the history, he died February 21st, 1965. Okay? That's not a year. That's 16 days short of a year. Okay? That he, from the time he left the nation, he came in the nation officially when he came out of jail was in 1952. He became a Muslim before that in jail, but the messenger recognized you as a Muslim when you're out of jail, because when you're in jail and accept Islam, you don't have the forces of the world working on you. There's not a liquor store on every corner. Right? There ain't no old flames in the girl or the reefer man. He's not there. See, in jail it's very hard to get a stick or a joint or to get a drink. You understand? And ain't no woman in jail unless you are acey-deucey and you're going after the boys. You understand? So, therefore, in jail, you can live a good, pious life. I see many Muslims strong as a brick wall in jail. As soon as they hit the street, melt like butter on a hot day. You understand? So therefore, the real test of whether a man can be a Muslim or not is not in jail, but it's when he hits the street. The liquor store is right on the corner. The dope man is right on the corner. So the real test is when he gets outside. So the messenger recognized him in 1952 when he came out of prison. And from 1952 to 1964 is 12 years that Malcolm served the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Okay? So Malcolm, here he's, I'm going to put in the NOI, Nation of Islam. Okay? Here he's in the nation. Okay? This is not quite 1 year. I will give him credit for 1 year, okay, out of the NOI, Nation of Islam. Okay? Now, if you want to be just and talk about the greatness of a man, what did he do the 12 years that he was in the nation? He helped open mosques up and down the East Coast. Temple number 13, temple number 14, temple number 15, temple number 17. All of the temples in the Delaware Valley. Malcolm was instrumental in opening those temples. He started the Muhammad Speaks newspaper. When the messenger couldn't speak in public rallies, Malcolm spoke in behalf of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He made thousands of converts in the city of New York. Thousands of people came to the call of Islam in those 12 years, okay? He attacked the system. He brought our people to a level of consciousness about the struggle of black people around the world in the 12 years that he served the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. In this 1 year that he was away, and it's not quite 1 year, remember, 16 days short, Malcolm spent 3.5 months overseas. He was out of the country for 3.5 months. So therefore, while he was out of the country for 3.5 months, he attempted to build 2 organizations. One was called Muslim Mosques Incorporated, and the whole AAU. Those are the 2 organizations that he attempted to build. And he tried to get a program for this, which he never did get. And the reason that he built 2 organizations, when he started, he was going to let white folks in. And then the brothers who left the nation with him opposed that so much, so he had to split it up between a political and a religious movement. Okay? But the religion of Islam, you don't split up. There's no such thing that I'm a Muslim, but this is my political side. Islam covers every facet of life. You don't divide your political life from your religious life, not in the religion of Islam. Separation of the church and the state. That's Western madness. If God is right, God is right. God is not only right on Sunday, and then when it comes to the Senate and the Congress, God don't have no place here. That's madness of the Western world. If God is the answer to all, then God is the answer to all. Now, you don't separate the political philosophy from your religious philosophy. You don't put religion in the closet, as Malcolm said on the balance of the bullet. That's a mistake. Not in the religion of Islam, and any Muslim will tell you that. So he tried to compromise, but in the few days that he had in America, he was busy trying to get himself together. He was in the press trying to explain his program. He never really got it off the ground. I'm just being frank. These are the facts, okay? And I'm not being biased because Malcolm left the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I'm showing you the actual facts of where it stands. So the devil is looking at all of this, and when Malcolm reached the point in 1965, okay, in January, they saw that Malcolm could no longer be used. And they saw that Malcolm was making a move and reconsidering that the mistake he made, the greatest mistake he made in March 8, 1964, was to leave the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. In 65, Malcolm X wanted to reconsider coming back to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And as I mentioned in the lecture, he made a tape that was to be sent to the messenger, asking the messenger to accept him back in the Nation of Islam. So when the devil saw that, they said that the best thing, he would serve our purpose much better dead. So they, some black men killed Malcolm. Quite naturally, they blamed us, because this should be the stone that would destroy Malcolm and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at the same time, but that didn't work. So Malcolm coming back from overseas, and I want to mention this briefly if I can go into it. I made a note on it. That Malcolm's trip to Mecca, and as you read and study on Malcolm, you'll see that they'll say he went to Mecca, and he saw white Muslims, and he had a great revelation. And the revelation made him feel that all white folks were not devils. Malcolm went to the Middle East in 1959. He was sent by the Nation of Islam. He did not go into the city of Mecca, but he went to Jeddah. And what's in Jeddah, you see it in Mecca, the same thing. Mecca just happened to have the Kaaba on the black stone, but it's the same people in Jeddah and Mecca, because everybody that goes to Mecca must go to Jeddah first. That's the only way into Mecca. You got to start in Jeddah and then go into Mecca. So therefore, Malcolm saw that in 59. So it was no great revelation in 1964 that he wrote back, and this white man put on the front of the New York Times that I've eaten out of the plates with men who had the whitest of skin, the bluest of eyes, and the blondest of hair, and so forth, okay? But all of that was a little game, and Malcolm being smart, Malcolm wasn't convinced that white folks were all right. Malcolm knew that he had to build a bridge to those Negroes that loved white folks if he planned to lead them. And once he was away from the Nation of Islam, he felt that he could lead them, but he knew that they loved white folks, so he needed a revelation in order to be able to talk to them Negroes. So he goes to Mecca, and this is where the revelation comes. He sends it back, and so all of the intellects who love white folks, married to white women, who really are in the civil rights movement, but want white folks with them, say now Malcolm is our man. He sees that white folks are all right, okay? So Malcolm sends that back. He sends it back, and they print it in the paper, and everybody feels that Malcolm has changed. So the devil sees in 65 that Malcolm is reconsidering his whole move. He saw that he did not have the ability to organize young people like the messenger. He couldn't keep the brothers who had left the nation with him strong in their moral discipline as it was in the FOI when he was a part of the nation. During that time, there was a brother in New York named Clarence 13X. He was a brother who was in the ranks, and right at the time that Malcolm left the nation in March of 1964, this brother left the nation also, but he was really out of the nation for an infraction of the rules. And while Clarence was out, Clarence started a little movement among young people in the streets of New York. And he started them, and he called them the 5%ers. And the name that he gave to them was from the lessons given to us by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, where it describes a 5%, a 10%, and the 85%. The 5% are the poor and righteous who know who the true and living God is and teach that the true and living God is man. The 10% are the bloodsuckers of the poor. They live off the 85% who are the masses of the people. So this brother started a little group, and he started with children who were 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, and he called them 5%ers, and they began to teach and study them. When white folks realized, and when I say that I'm talking about the government in particular, that Malcolm was reconsidering his whole thing of a separate movement, realizing that the base of all that he had was in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the more he lived every day, the more he realized that the messenger was correct. When his house was burned in the first part of February 1965, somebody threw a firebomb into his home in Elmhurst, Queens, and Malcolm's children were in the house. How many heard about that or read about it in some of the publications? And when the police checked it out, they came out with a statement in the New York paper that they thought Malcolm had burned the house himself. And they found a full bottle on his dresser, and Malcolm said that that's insanity. But what it was saying to Malcolm, this is what the devil said he was doing. And what it said to Malcolm in his mind, I almost could hear him thinking that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is right. These people are nothing but a race of devils. They would put in the paper that I burned my own house with my baby sleeping in the bed. I mean, he was furious. He was upset, but it made Malcolm reassess the fact that he could see that the white man was the devil. And when he, in that month, he had went to Paris, and he was supposed to speak in Paris, but the French government, de Gaulle, declared him persona non grata, means you can't land here. And they wouldn't let him get off the plane and sent him back to England, and from England he took a plane back to America. And Malcolm made the statement when he came back, now I'm convinced that it's more than the Nation of Islam that is interested in my death. Meaning that the government of America had to say something to the French government, such as, look, he's about to get killed. And if you don't want him to die on French soil, don't let him land in your country. And so they sent Malcolm back to America, but now Malcolm had reached the point that he could see that the white folks now wanted him out of the way, and the Nation of Islam would be used as the ploy. And so Malcolm wanted to make a reconciliation with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he put it on the tape. But he never lived to get the results of the tape nor to get the tape in the hand of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So Malcolm is killed on February the 21st, 1965. And James Baldwin, who wrote a script for a movie that they were going to do on Malcolm, described the day very vividly. I know what I was doing the hour they announced that he was killed, but the whole thing around the killing and the brothers who were involved is still up in the air right now. There's controversy over it because two innocent men that I know are innocent, and I don't say this lightly, the two brothers who were lieutenants in the temple that worked with me, I know that the men were not there that day, but yet and still they gave them life in prison because they wanted to really not indict the brothers, but indict the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for the killing of Malcolm. So Malcolm is killed. There's much more to it, but I don't have time to go into it tonight. He's shot down in front of his people at the Audubon Ball with police agents sitting in there. I'm sure FBI agents. When I was in the country of Guyana in South America, I met Malcolm's top lieutenant, a brother named James 67, who I had known for many years. He lives there now. And he said to me, he said, brother, when Malcolm was killed, the day he was killed, the New York City Police Department filmed the whole event. And he told me this when I was in Guyana, and I bear witness to what he said, because when Mike Wallace did the piece on the assassination of Malcolm, he showed a little short film strip of that day, a film strip. And it was from a distance, if you saw it on television, bearing witness to the fact that somebody had filmed the killing of Malcolm, meaning that they knew that the two men that they charged were absolutely innocent. But to clear those men would bring in the government, and the government wants to wash its hands of it and let it be as if it was a hit job set up by the Nation of Islam in order that people who love Malcolm would hate the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Look at it now. So Malcolm is killed. The Nation of Islam suffers a setback in it. Wallace Muhammad, who I described in my last lecture as the one who crippled Malcolm by feeding Malcolm poisonous information about the messenger. The number one thing, it wasn't Wallace telling Malcolm about the messenger's children, but it was Wallace telling Malcolm that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is jealous of you, brother. You understand? And here the messenger, this is his student. A teacher doesn't become jealous of a student. A teacher becomes proud of the student and the progress that a student is making. But when Wallace Muhammad kept feeding Malcolm that kind of madness and showing him how they were doing him a dirty deal, this worked on Malcolm internally. So Wallace cripples Malcolm, gets out there, and Malcolm writes in his book, if you read it, that he had respect and love for Wallace, and he sought Wallace's help and building his organizations that he was trying to build, but Wallace said later. And when Malcolm was killed, Wallace ran back to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as his son and said, please accept me back. The messenger said, go before my followers. And on February the 26th, 1965, Wallace Muhammad came before us at a Savior's Day convention and said that he was sorry to judge his father. And I got his voice on tape, his words. He said that he greeted the people and called his father the messenger, my father, the messenger of Allah. And he said he asked the Muslims to accept him back, and that he was wrong to judge his father, because only Allah could judge his father. He was right in what he was saying, and he asked the Muslims would they accept him back. And knowing, and the Muslims, we knowing how much the messenger loved that boy, the Muslims shouted their approval to accept him back in the fold. But inside of his heart there was a disease. And if you would go back and get the September 1964 edition of the Sepia magazine that's in most good black libraries, they have it in the periodical Guides to Literature, September 1964 Sepia magazine, read the article by Wallace Muhammad in that Sepia, and you can see what was in Wallace's heart then is the thing that has been in his heart all the time, and it manifested itself when the messenger left us in 75. Okay, so Malcolm is killed. The Nation of Islam, we had a Savior's Day convention that year, a 3-day convention, as a matter of fact, and the messenger now has to regain the momentum of building the nation under the cloud that's throughout the country that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is responsible for the death of Malcolm. If you get some Muhammad speaks at that time, they had some men who they say they were on their way to Chicago to kill the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The devil creating hysteria. That night that Malcolm was killed, that Monday night, we used to have fruit on Monday night in New York.
after our fruit class at the temple that Malcolm was once over and we all left and went home, that night, in the middle of the night, our temple was burned to the ground on 116th Street and Lenox Avenue. Now, and quite naturally, everybody would say that Malcolm's followers did it in retaliation for us killing Malcolm, and they expected open warfare in the streets of New York, but it was the devils who did it. And we later found out, almost 10 years later, that the devils had set these brothers up to burn the temple down, hoping that we would go and extract retribution on the followers of Malcolm for the burning of our temple. But being that the messenger of God was wiser than their plan, he told us to leave them totally alone and have nothing to do with it. So therefore they burned the temple to the ground, and the messenger turned around and brought the whole corner in New York and rebuilt the temple in that same spot. All praise is due to Allah. Look, all praise is due to Allah. Now I know I'm talking fast, but I'm trying to get through this lecture, and I don't want to go into a part 4, so I'm going to move right along. So 1965, the nation now is trying to regain. Articles and papers are flashing all across the country, and then to get the real impact or sense of this period in history that was now 17 years ago. Some of you ain't but 20 years old. You were 5 years old at the time. You understand? Some of you were not even on the planet then. But if you want to get a sense of what was going on at that time, and white folks understand it more so than the black people who looked at it on the surface. They saw that George Washington had made a decree that Islam would not be spread in the Western Hemisphere. When they found slaves that were Muslims, they separated them from the rest of the slaves. They made sure that the Muslim slaves did not pray, and that they did not speak Arabic or read the Holy Quran. They did not allow the Muslims who could read when they came to America to continue to pass on that reading. And George Washington, just as Isabel and Ferdinand, who were the ones that gave Columbus the commission to sail his ships into the Western Hemisphere, made a decree that Islam would not be taught on the Iberian Peninsula, which was Portugal and Spain, and nor would Islam be allowed in the Western Hemisphere. They made a decree that any slaves brought in the Western Hemisphere that were Berber slaves, okay, and what they were saying, Muslim slaves, that they must either be put to death or not allowed to mingle with the other slaves, so that Islam would never be established in the Western Hemisphere. Now the devils who understand history know that this was a written decree that they would not allow Islam to spread in the Western Hemisphere. They said, number one, Islam has the ability to take fear out of the man. In other words, we rule the slave with fear. And if he has a religious belief that removes fear, then the slave becomes a threat. So his desire was to make sure that no Islam was spread in the Western Hemisphere. Also, Islam had the ability to organize black people. So therefore, if they were Muslims and a Muslim could lead them, then he could organize them and they would produce slave revolts in the Western Hemisphere. So they knew the danger of the spread of Islam, so what they wanted to make sure that Islam never spread among black people. And when they saw the rise of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it meant Islam coming to black people. So therefore, their job was to stamp it out, to make it an alien Islam, to make it unacceptable. And if the movement gained any ground, then we must make sure that we tie the movement down so it will have no effect among the masses of black people. So now in 1965, the devil seemed to feel that he had his grip, that now he had tainted the name of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He had weakened the Muslim community because there were many Muslims who were strong. And when they put their hand to the gospel plow of Elijah Muhammad, they didn't look back, nor did they go back. But there were others who were holding the plow loosely and weakly, and didn't have their self all the way in Islam, had one foot in the world and one foot in Islam. Loved Islam, but still the world had its clutches into them, and they couldn't break the whole of the world, so therefore they looked for any excuse to dive back into the world. So therefore Malcolm, and what happened as a result of his killing, gave an excuse to many Muslims to go back into the world of the white man. So he thought maybe that he had either broken the back of the Nation of Islam or he had stopped the movement. As I said to my brothers the night coming over, that the messenger always wanted us to have uniforms. But he never came out with uniforms until after the great hypocrisy, as we call it, had subsided, then he put the brothers into what we call FOI uniforms. In 1965, the book, Message to the Black Man, came out. And the messenger had a couple of lines in there on Malcolm and Wallace. And he said that these boys will not be successful. So Malcolm goes out first, and his star shoots out, and it goes out away from the messenger. Wallace goes out next. And these last 7 years, Wallace now is at the end of his rope, and he shot his load, and his fuse now is out, and he's on the decline. So the messenger wrote that they would not be successful, and he wasn't just lumping them together at that time. Whatever they desired to do against my work, they would not be successful. 1965, May of that same year, Brother Lewis X, as he's known at that time, who was the minister in Boston, is transferred by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to New York to head the temple in New York. The messenger had an interim minister there, James Shabazz, or James X, from Newark, New Jersey, who was holding down Newark and New York. But then finally, after the death of Malcolm, the messenger, knowing the power of New York, sent Minister Farrakhan to take Malcolm's place as the minister of Temple Number 7 in New York and let Brother James take care of Newark, New Jersey. Brother Farrakhan came into a very hostile environment. And his history has always been like this, the rebuilding. When he first went to Boston, the Boston Temple was in bad shape, and Brother Farrakhan helped to rebuild the Boston Temple, Temple Number 11. When he came to New York, we were in bad shape in New York, because when the brothers went around to sell their Muhammad Speaks, that we were getting every week from Chicago, we were down to about 20,000 papers. And that's all we could sell in the city of New York. Remember, New York got 8 million people, and 2 million of them were black. And we couldn't sell any papers. When we would knock on doors and say Muhammad Speaks, and they would say, get the so-and-so away from this door. Y'all niggas killed my man Malcolm. See, we faced that in the street. When the brothers stood on the corner to sell paper, they said, those are the niggas that are responsible for killing Malcolm. This is what we had to face, the wrath of the people. So Brother Farrakhan came into that kind of environment, came into a temple where the believers were not solid and straight, because they were facing the wrath of the people of New York who loved Malcolm. And every day the white man was holding Malcolm up as the patron saint of the revolution, and pointing the accusing finger of those Muslims. The trial of our brothers who were on trial, the trial was a big thing in the papers all during the period of the trial. Big stories about the trial, evidence coming out at the trial, until finally they got a conviction. And one brother at the trial, who was involved in the killing of Malcolm, knew that the other men were innocent and that they were not a part of the assassination team, stood up on the last day when the defense counselor gave his summation, and the prosecuting attorney was about to lay his stuff down. The brother jumped up in the court and said that I am guilty. He said, I am guilty, and I was involved in it. But these two men had nothing to do with it. And they are innocent. They were not a part of the hit team. So the judge said, well, who was? He said, I'm not going to say, but it's not these men. So the prosecuting attorney took that. And the prosecuting attorney used that. He delivered a stinging indictment. And that beast had his stuff together. The devil said, here's a man that we caught on the scene, because they caught him right there. Here's a man that is guilty. Here's a man that knows that he's going. But he knows that his two comrades who were there with him were not caught on the scene. So as a last-ditch effort, he's trying to save his two comrades who is as guilty as he is, trying to get them free, because we didn't catch them on the scene. We caught him on the scene. I mean, that devil dealt. And when that devil finished, in that half an hour, he had that fury like this, and they just said, all three of them. He said, I asked the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I asked you to indict and find all three of these guilty men guilty as charged, and that's what they did. The brothers, even though the wife got up there and said, my husband was home with me in the house, and cried and pleaded, he was innocent. We brought another man in who was a witness that was there and saw the men who did the killing, and told them that it was not the men sitting in the courtroom, but they didn't hear none of that. They had an undercover policeman who was there on the scene, and when you see pictures of Malcolm, the man bending over, giving Malcolm mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, I guess that's the word they use, right? And he was a policeman on a squad called BOSS in New York. That's the Bureau of Special Services. Their code name was BOSS. He was an undercover policeman that came into the temple. And when Malcolm left, he left with Malcolm and worked his way up in the ranks, and it didn't come out until 7 years later, because after Malcolm was killed, he joined the Panthers, and he worked his way up into the Panthers. And when they indicted the Panther 21, Gene Roberts came to the surface as the one to point the finger at him, and Gene Roberts was the one on the stage when Malcolm was killed. Check it out now. So what the devil wanted to do, he wanted to tie the assassination of Malcolm into the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in order to stop the messenger from being effective in spreading Islam. So in 65, Brother Farrakhan comes to New York. He's Louis X at that time. The messenger didn't give him his name until after he was in New York a few months. And the messenger gave him the name Farrakhan at that time. So Brother Farrakhan began to work. And it was a very difficult job. Number one, being that Malcolm had defected and Malcolm was so popular, the Muslims were suspect of all ministers. All of them, they held themselves at a distance because Malcolm, we all gave ourselves and we loved that brother. You understand? I mean, he was the man of the hour. Malcolm was the top soldier of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And when he left the messenger, and we said, oh, wow, man, why would he leave the messenger like that? So therefore, all were suspect there. So Brother Farrakhan had that battle to fight, to win the confidence of the believers and prove his ability as an able minister and an able administrator. Malcolm was the man that the messenger had given his all, and the messenger said, never again will I teach another minister like I taught Malcolm. So Minister Farrakhan learned from the messenger, but he learned it at a distance. He never had private sessions with the messenger, as he told you in his lectures, like Malcolm and Wallace did. The messenger taught him, but taught him at a table when everybody was there at the same time. And he didn't give him any special teaching, but Brother Farrakhan took what the messenger gave him at the table with the rest of them there, and he was like the man that took it, and he used it to its max and became a strong minister in the country. The messenger tried other brothers on the radio, and then eventually he put Brother Farrakhan on the radio in the late 60s. Now I want to go to a period of time here, Brother, I don't have my watch. Why don't you keep me up on the time, okay, if you get a watch. I want to go to a period of time during the 60s when the riots broke out around the country. There was a time when the country was really in an uproar. The Vietnam crisis was escalating. Black people were suffering in the cities, and riots and burnings start breaking out all over the country. Revolutionary figures begin to emerge. Number one, the Black Panthers. The birth of the Black Panthers is really a direct result of Malcolm calling the brothers to arms. And Malcolm felt that, the brothers should arm themselves. As Muslim followers of the messenger, he's always taught us not to carry arms. And some brothers tried to science on that the messenger really, that was what he said publicly, but he didn't mean that. No, the messenger was not a liar. And he was not a deceiver. The messenger taught us not to carry arms, and he meant just that. Right. So when we began to grow in the late 60s, in Chicago in particular, I'm giving it as a classic example, we ended up with an armed patrol to to guard our businesses throughout the South Side. And what happened soon as the brothers went and got a license from the white man to carry a weapon, which the messenger was opposed to. And this is the kind of man the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was. He would tell you what he felt you should do, or what God revealed to him. And if you insist on your way, he said, well, brother, go ahead and try it if you think that'll work. Now, anybody that ever was around the messenger, that's the way he was. He'd tell you first what he wanted. But he never imposed his way and said, this is what I want, brother. And he said, this is the best way, brother. This is the way I would go about it if I was you. But those who thought they knew more than him would go and do it another way. And then when they run into difficulty and run into big trouble, and we had trouble, soon as these brothers had these pistols walking around armed, shooting started breaking out. Right. And the messenger called them in and said, the shooting didn't start until you put those weapons on. Right. Then he told them, go give the devil his weapon and his permit back. And if you do it the way I told you to do it, it wouldn't happen. We lost a couple of brothers in that matter. And so therefore, showing you that the messenger did not teach us to carry arms. He was not the one that said one thing out of this mouth, but yet still told the brothers to get weapons over there. No, he didn't do it because, and it's not that the messenger was a coward or he didn't want to carry arms. The messenger knew that the first thing he had to do with us is discipline us. And that we were savage and we had spent 400 years under this devil being taught to hate each other. And as soon as you got a pistol, you didn't have the pistol for the white man. Because when you got in an argument with your brother, the same pistol that you pretend that you got for the white man, you go using it on your brother. And it was proved with the Panther Party, with Ron Karenga, and the US group in California, with every black revolutionary group in America. It was proven that the weapons that they got, they said for the enemy, we begin to use them on each other. The Panther brothers killing each other. Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton fall out and shooting all over the country. And so the devil's watching them shooting each other, knowing that their arms are not sufficient to deal with well-armed white America, but would only use the weapon on each other. Brothers come into Islam, say I'm a good Muslim today, but slide back into the world of the white man and got a pistol and go out there and shoot his black brother that he hasn't been taught thoroughly in the knowledge of how to love the man. So when he runs into a disagreement, he pulls the man full of lead, and that's why it's going on in the black community right now. Look, they're sticking up each other. They ain't downtown sticking up the white boy. They putting bullets in each other, fighting and shooting each other over drugs, over women, over territory, over a new pair of shoes or a raggedy car, and whatever you have. That's what's going on in the black community. So the messenger knew that we had not grown into the knowledge of the love and respect of one another. And why would you put an arm or pistol in the hands of a man like that? No, that's madness, brother. So the messenger taught us not to carry arms. And if you believe in Allah, you ain't got to be all strapped down, because Allah is the best knower. And if it's your time to die, I don't care what kind of heat you got, when your hour comes, that heat is not going to save you. Your blood is going out of here anyway. Look, all praise is due to Allah. Look. So in 1965, 67, 68, the nation now is trying to recover. The messenger is forging ahead. Quietly, the messenger wasn't one for press conferences. He never called no press conference unless it demanded a press conference for something that he was doing. But you can count the press conferences that the messenger had. I think in the whole history of the nation, it may have been 4. And they were called because of situations in the country. When Kennedy was killed, and Malcolm made a reckless statement about the death of Kennedy. When the brothers were shot down in the streets of New Orleans, and they were trying to get a statement out of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, hoping that the messenger would condemn them, because these brothers met and fought with some policemen in the street, but these brothers were outside of the circle of Islam. They had rebelled against things that were happening in the nation, and they were trying to show those of us who were in the nation what we should be doing, and they confronted the police on the streets in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Some policemen died, but more of our brothers died, okay, in that battle, and they wanted the messenger, really the press wanted the messenger to condemn that action, and the messenger did not condemn them. He just covered the brothers totally. That's all it was to it. But the messenger didn't call press conferences, but from 1965 to 1969, the messenger was working quietly. He was, number one, moving the papers up slowly and surely throughout the country. We were asking every brother to sell a certain amount of paper. There were brothers who were buying papers and stacking them. They were buying them and were not selling them. The messenger said that he cannot stop his work for some lazy brother, you understand, who would buy the papers but wouldn't spend the time out there selling the papers. And believe me, that paper saved a lot of brothers who came into the nation out of the world, and when the world, they were idle. That's why they were shooting dope and drinking liquor and standing on the corner and hanging out and talking about nothing but garbage, making babies, not taking care of, couldn't keep a job over 2 months. I mean, they were general niggers, and when the messenger got them and brought them into Islam, immediately the messenger had to clean them up and put them to work. So if you come into something and you don't have nothing to do, then you slide back right into the whole lifestyle. So the messenger dropped 300 papers on you. You understand? And when time you got shackled and sold those papers, and selling papers made you teach Islam and try your sword out. And he was sharpening your sword all the time, but you didn't know to the extent that your sword was sharpened because you hadn't tried it out. But every time you knocked on the door and a Negro cussed you out, the messenger didn't say bust him in the mouth. You understand? That means that you had no wisdom to deal with his argument. But the messenger gave you the wisdom, so when he cussed you out, he said, brother, you shouldn't feel like it. Teach Islam and try your sword out. And he was sharpening your sword all the time, but you didn't know to the extent that your sword was sharpened because you hadn't tried it out. But every time you knocked on the door and a Negro cussed you out, the messenger didn't say bust him in the mouth. You understand? That means that you had no wisdom to deal with his argument. But the messenger gave you the wisdom, so when he cussed you out, you said, brother, you shouldn't feel like that way. You understand? And then you started asking him questions and probing him and dropped some of that wisdom on him, and then your sword got sharper all the time. But the messenger began to move the papers around the country. The paper was the commodity that turned the wheels of the nation of Islam. The messenger brought a newspaper plant. He brought farmland. He moved quietly into all of these areas. He supported the schools around the country where we educated our own babies from the sale of the paper and the quarters that the brothers were turning in for the sale of that paper. So as the messenger moved quietly, by 1969, the nation began to emerge, and they began to write about us in a few papers. The black Muslims, who have been working quietly since the death of Malcolm, are now emerging as one of the strongest groups in America. Our discipline we were well known for. And we were there was a love-hate relationship in the black community. They loved us because we represent the tower of strength. But they had this dislike because the white man was continuously poisoning our people, that we were responsible for the death of Malcolm. So by 1970, the papers began to write about the Nation of Islam. Brother Farrakhan emerged as the spokesman of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He went to West Point and spoke at West Point. He went to the major universities in the country. He dealt with 500 black preachers in Boston, and he began to hit the campus circuits. And people used to hear him on the circuit and say, he sounds like Malcolm. And they used to hear a fiery spokesman of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and Brother Farrakhan was like a living testament that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad produced Malcolm, and he can produce others. That the real father of Malcolm was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, was the message of Brother Farrakhan. So into 1970, the nation now begins to grow. The nation now begins to move into the mainstream of the black struggle, and those that were in the struggle, they wanted to be more militant. On black campuses across the country, the students, instead of asking for integrated dorm, wanted their own dorm. Instead of them on major white universities wanting to eat with white students, they wanted a black section. They wanted black studies program. They wanted black professors. They were demonstrating and moving on every campus in America, and at the root of that was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The Panther Party said if the messenger can call them devils, then surely we can call them pigs. If the messenger can ask for a separate state, surely we can ask for separate dorm. If the messenger can say a separate land of our own, then we want separate eating facility. If the messenger can say separation of death, we want a separate program to teach the background and the culture of black people. So the demands that blacks made on campuses throughout America was rooted in the strength of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Let's look at it now. There was this socialist trend, stemming number one from the Panthers. And the Panthers really didn't get destroyed until they invited them white folks in to help them. Once the white folks came in, they wreaked total havoc in the movement. And it opened the way for the FBI and all of their agents to move in, not in the mind of another black person, but to move in physically themselves. So a socialist trend began to run the revolution route with Che Guevara and the emergence of Cuba, and Che Guevara as a strong revolutionary, and Castro saying that he was a communist. And Che Guevara being the number one guerrilla fighter. And that's why when they caught him in Bolivia, the CIA, when they caught him, said, we got Che Guevara. And Che Guevara being smart, when they caught him and they were about to kill him, Che Guevara told the Bolivians that caught him, said, don't kill me. He said, I'm worth more alive than dead than you. And they didn't know who they had. He said, I'm Che Guevara. And so immediately that shook them all up, and they went and called the CIA. And the CIA, or when I say that, the United States government, they said, hold it right there. And they came immediately and put a bullet in his head because he was the number one threat to the planet as far as attracting people to revolution. So this spirit moved through black America. So the young brothers on the campus was reading Fanons, A Wretched of the Earth. And they were reading Che Guevara's guerrilla warfare. And so this kind of feel that socialism was the answer began to move. And so the white folks looked at that. And they said, now the Nation of Islam is growing financially and in membership. But if we can describe the Nation of Islam as black capitalists, then we will turn the young revolutionary brothers off from being attracted to the Nation of Islam as a movement. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad had at the base of his teaching God and the will of God. And just as they did when Malcolm left the nation, and the brothers that were with Malcolm began to fraternize with the socialists, they used the agent, and this is documented. You can read it in a book called COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence agency of the United States government is documented in their section on the young socialists, how their agents were told that this relationship between Malcolm and the young socialists is getting too strong and we must produce an argument. And so the agent's job was to say, well, let's produce an argument on God. The Muslims believe in God. Most of the socialists are atheists. So if you produce that argument, they will be contending all the time over the existence of God, whether or not God exists or not. In the book called Code Name Zorro by Mark Lane and Dick Gregory, there's a section in there on the FBI. And the agents of the FBI were told that they had to come up with new, innovative, dirty trick schemes. Every month they had to submit them to the Bureau. And some of the things that they were submitted was like this. Or the other things that they submitted is that Elijah Muhammad teaches his followers to go clean shaved and to wear, clean dress. The revolutionary trend is fatigues and black jackets and roguey as you can be, you understand? And look like you from among the proletariat, the struggling masses of people, but never look like you involved in the system. So the FBI agents, and one of their tricks was to say, well, and you grow your hair, you go unkept, you understand? The best thing is don't bathe at all, really look revolutionary. And revolution is a full-time job, don't even work on the job. That became the trend among the young brothers, you understand? So therefore, if they were engaged in the struggle, nobody wanted to work, and they wanted to look as bad as possible, and we tried to look as good as possible. So the agents wanted to seize that. I hope you follow this close now. So what the agent did, the agents devised the plan. The Messenger wrote an article in the Muhammad Speaks during the 60s, I believe it was 68. And the Messenger described why do people wear beards. And he talked about what a beard was about. And he said that how the beard, in the olden days was used as a disguise because during the dark ages of Europe, the rulers were always fighting with the masses. The rulers lived in a castle up on a hill, and the masses or the peasants lived around the castle, and they had to work the land and give taxes or wheat and so forth to the rulers who ruled over. So the rulers had to hide their identity because there was always somebody in the masses who wanted to assassinate the rulers, okay? You got the same old thing in America today. I guess when they freed Hinckley, white folks got a taste of how it feels when they do something to us and a whole white jury. They had an all-black jury except two crackers. Excuse me for digressing, but I had to get that one in right quick. But the beards were to hide their identity. So they grow their hair and their beard, and you couldn't identify who the person was. The Messenger said it. In certain areas of the world, they grow the beard to protect the chin. And that's why you notice a man that comes from Uganda, he grows hardly no hair. But the man who lives in Africa in the Sahara, where he's got the wind whipping his face, he grows hair, okay? Showing you that the body produces according to the need. So the Messenger talked about the beard, and he showed a man in there with a beard. And being that we're generally unclean people, and it is the truth. Yes. The Messenger had a picture of a man with flies flying around his beard. Some of you remember the picture, okay? And so what the FBI did is they clipped that out. And they took that, and they took right out of St. Louis, and they sent it to every black leader in the country that had a beard. And say, this is what Elijah Muhammad is saying about you. See? And so they were trying to produce that kind of division in the struggle at that time. And then they showed us, they said there's a Cadillac syndrome among those Muslims. They must be black capitalists. Then when the Panther headquarters started getting raided and hit all over the country, then they wrote an article in one of the underground papers, which was probably a plant from the Dirty Trick Squad again, saying that we noticed that as all revolutionary groups are being vamped on by the United States government, they're not attacking the Nation of Islam. But what they didn't know, that they had been attacking us a long time before that. In Los Angeles, they attacked the temple in Los Angeles with tanks, rolled tanks down. Was it Central Avenue at that time? Okay, rolled tanks down the street. They attacked other temples. Our brother was attacked in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The devil was always trying to attack us, but they didn't bring that. See, they dealt with what was current, and knowing that you have no feel or no knowledge of history, you didn't know that we had been attacked continuously by the enemy. But they used this to say that evidently it's a hands-off policy on the black Muslims because they are black capitalists. So Ofari wrote the book, Black Capitalists, and in that book, he's an African. And in that book, he described the Nation of Islam as capitalist. And so when the brothers in the struggle saw us, they said, they're them damn black Muslims. ain't nothing but black capitalism. But the messenger was trying to show us what progress was all about, and he was working quietly underground. So by 1970, the Congress of African People, which was really funded, had a big black nationalist meeting in Atlanta, Georgia in September of 1970. And every nationalist group in the country and all of the black leaders in the country, and they invited everybody, even Whitney Young was there. And these were from the Uncle Tom to the most militant. A man named M. Tangleese, his name was Haywood Henry at the time. He lives in California now. M. Tangleese, Imamu Baraka, and one other brother, Bill Cherry. Some of you may know him. He works with Push, or he used to work with Push. They organized the whole meeting. And the meeting was set up in Atlanta, Georgia. And so, being that they invited Uncle Toms and everybody, and believe me, among the so-called militant and nationalists, we were not loved, because in 1970, the idea was still floating in their head that we had killed Malcolm. I see that I'm going to run out of time, Brother William, in order to get through this last 5 years. What happened was they invited Louis Farrakhan. And so when Minister Farrakhan came, I remember the night clearly, the night that he was the speaker was in the Morehouse gym, the old gym. And before Brother Farrakhan, Whitney Young was to speak. And Whitney Young got up to speak, and he went with one of those system speak, you know, get into the system, and they booed him. I mean, they booed him so bad it was embarrassing. We felt sorry for him. And everybody was there. Jesse Jackson was sitting in the audience, Malcolm's wife Betty, Imamu Baraka. The place was jam-packed. Sonia Sanchez was there. I think that was the night she determined that she was going to become a Muslim. But the audience was packed with all of the nationalists from around the country, and this was the only speech that the messenger ever gave Brother Farrakhan what to tell the people in his delivery, okay? The messenger would always say to him, brother, go how the Spirit of Allah guides you. But this speech, the messenger told Minister Farrakhan what to say, and it was one of the best speeches that he ever delivered in his life. And so after they booed Whitney Young, and Whitney Young is the one that they said drowned and swimming in Africa, and there's always been suspect of what happened to the brother. But they booed him, and he was about to leave, so Brother Farrakhan asked him to please stay, and Haywood Henry tried to calm the crowd. So after Whitney Young, Jerry Butler was due to play, and Jerry Butler happened to have a white boy in the band. And they worked him out. Jerry Butler couldn't even play. I mean, they got through with Jerry Butler. I think he went out of the business for a few years and he emerged later. But can you imagine that? You get on the stage and you got your band and you're going to play, and there's a white boy there, and I mean, they sent him through the ringer, and Jerry Butler and the band had to pack up and make an exit. And then that cleared the way for Brother Farrakhan. And Brother Farrakhan came on. If you want to read the speech, I don't think we even have a copy of it today. We do have a copy of it. Okay, but it's in this book, 7 speeches. Okay, the speech to the Congress of African People, I think that's the name of it. And Brother Farrakhan, in that speech, the messenger told him to tell him, don't speak ahead of your actual power to do. That was the theme, and the messenger gave him other things. And when he came back to the messenger after the speech, the messenger said, brother, you are more precious to me than all of the wealth in the earth, after he delivered that speech in Atlanta. But what that speech signaled, it signaled the Nation of Islam back into the mainstream of the black struggle, and then we became like the ultimate in the struggle. In other words, a brother that was awakened through some circumstances and wanted to get involved in the struggle, he may go into the Panthers or SNCC or some other group, but the ultimate end of where he was going was the Nation of Islam. And so in the early 70s, the brother said, when I get straight, I'm going to join the nation. When I get straight, I ain't going to marry until I can marry a Muslim sister. When I get myself together, I'm going to join the nation. Meaning he may have been out in the street shooting dope, smoking, and all of that. But if he had some light on in his brain, he was saying, one day I'm going to get straight and I'm going to join the nation. That's what the nation represented to the black movements across the country. It represented the ultimate in the struggle itself. But the FBI did not stop working. 1 year before Brother Farrakhan delivered that speech, the FBI was saying that we have tried everything to destroy Elijah Muhammad. We talked about his personal life. We talked about that. We talked about the accumulation of wealth. We made it appear as if he lived in a mansion, a little house that he had over there on 47th 7th Street, a house he paid $55,000 for. They described it as some elaborate mansion. If you read a description of the house, you would think it was a laid-out mansion. This is before he built the palace, which he didn't build until in the 70s. But they made it appear that he had a lot of wealth and that these poor, ignorant people were following him and giving all the money. But meanwhile, the messenger had opened up 46 schools. He is working quietly. Starting in 72, he was bringing fish into the country, okay, through a Japanese and a Peruvian connection. And then he began to say, he said to us, after the fish, next was coming shoes. And he had already worked with a few governments in the East to bring shoes, and so we could put shoes on every black person in America, knowing that we all wear shoes and every pair of shoes we put on comes from that cracker, okay? But showing that he was working quietly under the cover. He went and brought a press, okay, over $1 million, brought a building, put the press in the building. He moved and brought farmland. We got off a plane in Little Rock, Arkansas, and one of the skyjacks said, you know, some of your people were here looking at a big plot of land, some farmland. And we had already bought farmland at that time in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and we had the land in Michigan. And what it said to us, and then when we got to Texas and found out the messenger had people looking at land there, the messenger was moving all over the country to buy land. They gave him over 5,000 acres in Belize and Central America where he was going to grow citrus fruit. He wasn't talking about it in the press, but they were accusing him of everything, saying that he got all the money, he's doing this, and these poor people following. Meanwhile, he's supporting black education. We had schools from Los Angeles to Boston, Mass, where we had begun to educate our children, and the messenger had just made the step to open our first college level in Washington, D.C. under Dr. Lonnie Shabazz. Look, so now the nation was becoming set, and the American government saw it. So a year before Brother Farrakhan made that speech, the FBI report came out and said that we've tried everything. But the more we talk about it and the more we do against Elijah Muhammad, it seems like the people get closer around him. You understand? All you had to do was attack the messenger, and we tightened a band around him that wouldn't quit. Nothing could get through, including air. So the FBI saw that we can't do nothing by attacking Elijah Muhammad. We got to look for something else. So it was then thought that we must wait for him to die. They tried everything. They couldn't attack the religion because it would go against their own constitution. So they said that, and when he dies, you know, somebody has to come into power. This is 1969 now. So they said that the most likely one who we feel would be most advantageous to us would be Wallace Muhammad. I'm just telling you what they said. They spelled it out. They didn't say it in the words I'm saying it. They said it like this. They said that his son Wallace disagrees with him. He bears watching. And in the book that I'm reading, I read how when King Faisal of Saudi Arabia was old and senility began to set in and he was about to die, they told their agent, American government, their agent in Jeddah, to look at the sons and those who might come in and after him. They wanted a profile on the son to see if this son could be manipulated or controlled, or if this son would be in the best interest of the United States government. And if they thought that the son would not be in the best interest of the United States government, being that America was dependent on Saudi Arabia for oil, the thing to do is to hit that son and see if the one who's in back of him, and by hit him I mean kill him, get him out of the way, and see if the one in back of him is better suited for our purpose. This is the way the American government operates, okay? And that's why it's painful, all praise to people alive. And that's why it's painful when a mother thinks of sending her young son off to fight for America. They're debating in the Congress right now whether the American fighting force will be a part of the peacekeeping force. And Wallace mentioned a part of it in his paper, say how he fit the person to the T, but it's not him. That's very interesting. The Milwaukee paper, Milwaukee Carrier, this week carried the article, and they made mincemeat out of his statement, showing how he fitted to the T and how Brother Farrakhan was rebuilding the nation, and the nation is coming strong, and now he lashes out to accuse Brother Farrakhan of being used by him and knowing for 7 years the FBI has used him. And he said in his own words, and I got brothers that will bear me witness, that does the agencies of the government use you or manipulate you? He said, to the extent that I allow them to. Then he invited the FBI in to deliver us a lecture on crime and criminal activity in the black community, the number one criminal in the world comes to lecture us on criminal activity. Look, so in the 70s, the nation began to grow, and wealth became a test in the nation. It became a test for those who handled the millions of the nation, and it became a test of those who benefited by the wealth of the nation. Quite naturally, as the nation began to grow, we needed greater expertise in managing what Allah had blessed us with. So in October of 1972, Brother Farrakhan, that had set up a power base in New York for the Nation of Islam, invited the black intellects that Allah blessed them with a good input within New York, being that we broadcast live from the temple in New York. And when the messenger dedicated the temple in New York, he made a beautiful tape that I hope one day we put in print. But the messenger sent a tape because he couldn't be there himself, and he asked Allah to crown Brother Farrakhan with his wisdom, crown him and bless him in this house. And I bear witness that from that temple number 7 in New York, he was crowned and blessed. And in October of 72, Brother Farrakhan brought 2 plane loads of black intellects. They paid their own way. And they came to Chicago, and Brother Farrakhan brought them to the temple on Stony Island, and the messenger taught them. They didn't like the teaching, and they mentioned it to a reporter of the New York Times, Paul Delaney. And Paul Delaney wrote an article in the New York Times. And when he wrote the article in the New York Times, a Turkish Muslim picked it up who was a multi-millionaire. And he read the article about Elijah Muhammad and how he invited these intellects out to help him in his work. And the Turkish man called Brother Farrakhan in New York. Brother Farrakhan called the messenger and made an appointment for this man to meet the messenger, and the man put a whole steamship outfit at the disposal of the messenger, and we began to import millions of pounds of fish. He went to Peru, set up a relationship between the Japanese and the Peruvian to fish for the fish, box it, put it in Nation of Islam boxes, ship it into America, and we became the largest importers and sellers of the whiting H&G fish. I made a call for Brother Farrakhan to a fish merchant in a certain part of the country, and he said, "Are you all those men who used to sell all of that whiting?" I said, "Y'all sold a lot of fish," meaning that the whole fish industry knew about it, but the messenger said that that was only a sign. See, he started us knocking on the door with the paper, and some brothers as Wallace came in and called us paper boy in his first interview, talking about paper boys, and he was dropping a seed. And because he was trying to show that I'm with you, those who don't like to sell papers, he was like a Yaku. I hate to get off in this on this, but he was like a Yaku. Look, 70% of us were satisfied, 30% were dissatisfied. So the Yaku came in, and he wanted to appeal to the 30% who were dissatisfied to make a move on the 70% who were satisfied. Right. And those who were dissatisfied was usually somebody who had their aspirations frustrated because they wanted to do something and couldn't do it. There may have been some improprieties, and wherever you have government, you have improprieties. That's normal. You can't expect that everything in the government is going to be all right because you got some crooked people in there. So there are some improprieties. But if the improprieties do not supersede the good that's going on in that government, you don't call that an evil government, you call that a good government. So Wallace came in and he called us paper boys. But the paper boy that was knocking on the door and getting a quarter allowed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to be able to take $1 million and sink it into the fish. Allowed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to buy the most sophisticated press owned by any group in America and put it into a building. Allowed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to buy 12 Peterbilt tractors and trailers that cost 57 grand a piece and pay for them cash money. That's what the paper boy, as they described him, made the messenger, or put the messenger in the position to do by his work. And when the fish came, the brother now went back to the same customers, knocked on their door and sold them 10 pounds of fish cheaper than they could get it from the white man that brought another millions to the Nation of Islam and put the messenger in a powerful position to do other things for the followers. Look.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hit that like and subscribe button for me. Enjoy the video. Thank you.
So in this, the FBI saw the growth of the nation, but also they knew that with growth comes control and trouble. So now the enemies of the messenger begin to work. And in 1974, Wallace comes back to his father, professes that he believes. In December of 74, Mayor Daley, I believe it was December or November, that Mayor Daley honored the messenger. Who knows what day it was? Was it in December or November? One of the followers in Chicago, you should remember that. Mayor Daley and the government of the state of Illinois paid homage to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And something very interesting happened that day, because Brother Farrakhan was scheduled to speak that night. And we got on a plane in New York, and we were on our way here. And a snowstorm hit New York, and the plane couldn't get off the runway. And we sat in a plane for 3 solid hours. And when we finally got to Chicago, and we took a cab and rushed downtown to the Conrad Hilton, the meeting was just over. Okay? And Brother Farrakhan, for days, months really, said, I wonder why Allah didn't want me to speak at that meeting. But there was something about that meeting and something about that honor, because later the messenger said that when the devil begins to honor you, be careful. But the devils now were setting up. Wallace was back. The agents that were in the nation began to try to get Wallace into certain slots. So I'm going into 1975 now. So in January 18, 1975, Wallace Muhammad comes to New York. Brother Farrakhan, if anything should happen to the messenger, Brother Farrakhan is the heir apparent of the nation, and also he's the one that the messenger pointed out that the believers should listen to. But Wallace Muhammad wants the position as he thought Malcolm was going to get it, and he crippled Malcolm. To keep Malcolm from getting it, he crippled Malcolm, and when he saw the nation growing now, and he saw that his father was going up in age, and his father kept getting sick, Wallace comes back, and he's concerned now that Farrakhan doesn't get that position that he desires for himself. I'm just laying it out to you like it is, you understand? And I'm not laying it out secondhand, I'm laying it out firsthand. So on January the 18th, 1975, Wallace Muhammad comes to New York, and they have all of the fruit out. And he speaks to the men of the FOI. Brother Farrakhan introduced him that day. When he came to the temple, I met him downstairs, and we welcomed him as a brother and the son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who the messenger loved. And we brought him up, and I called Brother Farrakhan. He said, don't let him go on until I get there, because I want to introduce him to the fruit. So we asked Wallace to wait upstairs, and when the minister came, he introduced Wallace to the FOI. I gave him a beautiful introduction, okay? And he went and he spoke, and he talked on a whole lot of things. And right after he got to the end of his subject, at the end of his subject, he got right down to the bottom and said that I will stand in my father's place. And when I become the head of the nation, Minister Farrakhan will remain the national representative as long as he obeys. But if he disobeys, I will set him down. I don't care if 1 million people stand up. I mean, he said this out of the blue. And everybody the FOI was like frozen. We had almost 1,000 men in there. And they were frozen because they didn't understand what that was about. We didn't understand. None of us really did. But what was happening, Wallace knew that Brother Farrakhan was the one to stand in the place of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he saw it, and he knew that the people knew that, but he wanted to cut him down. And so he did that on January the 18th, 1975. None of us at that time, the messenger wasn't even in the hospital, nor was he sick. So the messenger matter of fact, he had a grandson who married into the minister's family, and also a nephew that married into the minister's family. And on January the 27th, 1975, we had a big wedding in New York, and many of the messenger's family come in, but there was an undertone there. And I want to just mention this part of history. In December of 74, we went to Jamaica in the West Indies, and we had a great Muhammad Ali Day there. And Brother Farrakhan spoke to about 20,000 people in the national arena, sports arena in Kingston. And after he spoke, and then he went to Manley's house, the Jamaica house. Manley was the prime minister, and he spoke to Manley's whole cabinet. And Manley was so impressed with the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and with Brother Farrakhan, they gave him some time to stay on the island. He stayed there. I came back to the States. Brother Farrakhan stayed there until January the 9th. He came back to New York, and he sat in his office that night. And he said to me, he said, brother, I got a feeling that something is going on in the nation. This is 9 days before Wallace came. He said, I just got that feeling that there is something going on. I don't know what it is. And he kept repeating it to me. And then, because we didn't see what was coming in a few days. And 9 days later, Wallace comes to New York. And after Wallace drops that out at that meeting, and everybody is totally shocked and not understanding it, we were in shock for a few days. And that Sunday, Brother Farrakhan spoke. And by that Sunday, he had came to grips with himself, because Wallace had said in the meeting that if a man came and stayed with you for 3.5 years and went away, and another man came and stayed with you for 40-something years, which man is the greater? So everybody's thinking, because they know the history of the nation. So nobody answered. A whole room quiet, just like in here. Then he said, the man who stayed with you 40-something years, of course. And everybody said, that's right. See?
And under that seed was that Master Farad Muhammad. The God himself stayed 3.5 years. And the messenger worked 44 years. And he was saying that my father is greater than Master Farad Muhammad. But that wasn't where he stopped at. He was trying to say, now if you knew that Master Farad Muhammad was God and is God, and you saying that the messenger is greater, then you saying that Master Farad Muhammad is not God. You understand? And then as soon as you get them looking at the messenger, you say, well, is the messenger God? Or is the messenger greater than the God that taught him? And as soon as you get him saying that, then he goes to cut the messenger down. See? It was all a science. And so he dropped that out there, and that was rolling around in everybody's brain. He leaves. Brother Farrakhan stands up to defend the messenger's teaching. First part of February, the messenger becomes sick in Mexico. They bring him back to Chicago. He's in the hospital. Right up every day. And it's an ongoing struggle. They're trying to get Brother Farrakhan to come to Chicago for some reason. And the reason is that Wallace is proclaiming himself the new leader of the Nation of Islam. And Brother Farrakhan is holding his ground in New York, making tapes and talking about damnable heresies creeping in. And people going back on the teach. I mean, beautiful tapes where he was defending the position of the messenger, but he was doing it on a high plane. Other people listened to it. It was a lecture, but those of us who were into the spiritual realm and knew what was going on in the nation could hear Brother Farrakhan fighting for the position of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Wallace Muhammad trying to assert himself as the leader of the nation. On February the 25th, the devils announced that the messenger has passed. Wallace goes a few days before that to the Chicago defendant and say that he will be the new leader of the Nation of Islam, trying to beat his brother Nate and other ones to the punch. And then he has a meeting and they all say, well, okay, not with the body, but with the family. It's better that we leave it in the hands of the family because Farrakhan is outside of the family, even though he is the best one to lead the nation because the man has the ability, the track record, and daddy or the father had his hand on Louis Farrakhan. But instead they brought it another direction. So Brother Farrakhan hears the announcement. I came to Chicago a few days early, and I was in a hotel that morning, and he called me and told me he was coming in and that they had just announced on the news that the messenger had passed. Brother Farrakhan comes in, he meets with Wallace Muhammad, and he tells them that, brother, I won't fight with you over the leadership of the nation. He said he knew the next step. If you know the next step, go ahead and take it, and he took a backward stand. The next day, they go out to the Savior's Day meeting. Wallace is announced as the head of the nation, and nobody is really, everybody is in a state of shock. And Wallace proclaims that he's the new leader of the nation, and this is what his father wanted for him, and the rest is history that we'll cover another night. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Brothers and sisters, you know, when you get involved in this, and I make notes so that I'll try to stick to them, but being that I lived this part of history very close, extremely close, then every time I talk about it, and the older I get, the more I see into what happened during this period. And those of you who are here for your first time, I guess you said, man, what was this cat talking about tonight? He was talking so fast. I know how you feel. Well, you have to excuse me. But I said to Brother William J., I said, I want to finish this subject tonight and let it go. But I just couldn't do it. So we're going to stop. Last time I stopped at 64, so I didn't make it until 75, okay? And now the rest of it from 75, I'll just give you a preview of what we will cover. Minister Farrakhan accepting, and as I described it in my talks around the country, it was like Solomon. And they had thought that there would be a big split in the nation and that there would be fighting. So those who had stolen the position got armed men to come in from around the country. I just got a letter from a brother in prison in Pennsylvania. He said that he was a part of the squad that they had sent to New York to watch Brother Farrakhan in case he tried to have a break-off movement. I just got to give you, this is history, and one day you'll read it. And because they wanted to try to secure the position for Wallace Muhammad. He stole the position. He got into a seat that now is burning his behind the pieces. You understand? I mean, it's burning him up because he stole what he knew didn't belong to him. And so now he's fighting for survival, and he really wants out of the position. He wants to get off the seat, but he tries to get off, and God just put him back down. And it's burning him up, you understand? And he can't go nowhere. So look, so we're going to cover Brother Farrakhan being taken out of New York, the internal jealousy of other ministers of Brother Farrakhan's popularity. And his popularity because of his work. He'll tell you sometimes, he say, well, I was kind of cocky, but God had blessed the brother with a golden and a gifted tongue. And he made converts in cities where ministers couldn't teach. He had ministers that didn't have the ability to articulate. But he was on the radio in that city, and the temples in those cities were full because Brother Farrakhan was preaching on 90 radio stations across America. Okay, so on my next lecture, and it will not be, if be the will of Allah, the week after next perhaps, we will cover Brother Farrakhan being removed from New York, how it took place, what was behind it. The Savior's Day meeting in 75 in Chicago, the announcement that the messenger had passed. Why did they take the messenger's body to the cemetery? And we had a big funeral. They said they put it in the ground. Then they went and dug the body up, put it in the temple, put an armed guard over the body of the messenger in the temple that they said was his body, all the way up until May of 1977. Then they put the body back in the ground in an unmarked grave. And when I went to the cemetery and asked the brother, we were there one day, I said, where is the grave of the messenger? And the brother, Raymond Sharif, had to count off paces and show me where the messenger's mother was. This is Sister Clara, and count paces. It must be right here. An unmarked grave. Why did they do that? Then to take Brother Farrakhan and put him over Low Temple here on the west side. Then stop him from speaking nationally. Okay? Then begin to move every minister in the country. And then take away the law of the temple. Break up the FOI and the MGT. Dismiss them as classes. And say we don't need that anymore. And then begin to make moves to establish a relationship with Saudi Arabia. I went on a fundraising tour of the Arab world and how it went down and what it meant. The rulers in Saudi Arabia and what they wanted to do and how they wanted Wallace to bow to them totally, and they were going to use the Nation of Islam as a catalyst, but they thought the discipline would remain. Wallace couldn't hold it that way, so the Arab world backed up off him and said later. And then they called in Brother Farrakhan, made an offer to him of millions of dollars. I was sitting there, and the man said that we will make you the Mujahid. And we will let Wallace go somewhere and philosophize. We can take care of him. That's his exact word. We can take care of Wallace. And you become the leader, and then when you die, he said, we'll make you the Mujahid, and when you die, we'll call you the Messiah. You understand? And Brother Farrakhan turned them down flat. But it was showing that all they wanted was somebody who would bow to them. What did that mean? How did the government work? And in these last 7 years, what has taken place? The rebuilding process. What did Brother Farrakhan go through in rebuilding? And why is it that those who were once under the messenger and then stung by Wallace can't seem to get their bearings no more? They're out there. They want to be followers of the messenger, but just can't get their personal life together. There's a reason for that. What does the spider mean? The 29th chapter of the Holy Quran is called a trial. And you heard Brother Farrakhan speak on how a spider catches its food in a net, and then it goes and shoots some enzymes into the insect, and it liquefies the insides of the insect, and the spider draws it all out and leaves the insect in the web, and the insect looks like a whole fly, but you touch it and it crumbles up. What does that have to do with the years that we were under Wallace, and he put that poison into us? He made us lose our confidence in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and even his teaching by the poison that he put into followers. And then when a man realizes he's all the way gone, and then he tries to climb back up the mountain to get back, he just can't seem to get back or get himself together. What is it there, and what is the problem with it? What is going on in America with the government, and why did the government first back Wallace? Now they've thrown him to the wolves, even though he's waving the American flag and got his patriotism. They parading the poor little innocent Muslim children carrying a flag that has done nothing for them up and down Michigan Avenue like little imps following after the devil himself. What does it all mean, and what will happen now that the Nation of Islam is coming back and the world community of Al-Islam in the West, or the American Muslim mission, is on its way down? What does it mean? So that will be the end of the history of the Nation of Islam, and we hope to do that in 2 weeks, okay? So what I will do at this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Brother Abdullah, who will read the announcements and also say the closing prayer, which will be very short. We have a public election. We ask you to help us in the public election. And I thank you for coming out, Brother Farrakhan. If it be the will of Allah, Brother Farrakhan will see you in 2 weeks. Okay, he will be back with us. We have an engagement this week, if it be the will of Allah, in Washington, D.C., at Howard University next Wednesday night. So we want you to come out. We may have a special guest speaking next Wednesday night, but please be out and be on time. Thank you. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum.
This is the end of our featured lecture. For additional free information, or if you would like to continue making these lectures possible, you may send your support to MEMPS at 5025 North Central Avenue, number 415, Phoenix, Arizona 85012. Or you may visit us on the web at memps.com. That's MEMPS